What's up, night owls? Welcome back to Demon Sleep. Real quick, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. I personally read every single one of them, and honestly, it makes my day seeing you all from around the world. If these dark tailies help you drift off or just escape reality for a bit, smash that like button and subscribe. But only if you think we've earned it. No pressure. Alright, lights off, rain on, blankets up. Let's dive into tonight's nightmare fuel. Fatal familial insomnia. The inherited death nobody can stop. He was 41 years old when he stopped sleeping entirely. Not poorly, not intermittently, entirely. His wife watched him move through their house at 3 a.m., at 4 a.m., at 5 a.m., eyes open, mouth moving around words that made no sense, hands touching the walls as though confirming they were still real. He was looking for a door that no one else could see. He was already gone. And all of this was written into him before he was born. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back. In the entire recorded history of the disease, 250 years of documentation across 5 continents, 47 identified families, hundreds of individual deaths. There is not one case of survival, not one case of successful treatment, not one exception to the progression from onset to death in fewer than 18 months. And this fact, the absolute consistency of it, is the most important thing to hold before any of the others. Because what follows is not the story of something that might happen or something that rarely happens. It is the story of something that happens always, to everyone it chooses. Consider if your capacity for consideration remains intact after what I am about to present, the nature of a thing that existed before any of its victims were born. Not a virus, not a bacterium, not any pathogen that requires transmission, external contact, the dark passage of something foreign into something it does not belong. What we are discussing here is a mutation, a single point alteration in a single gene, the PRNP gene, located on the short arm of chromosome 20, that has existed in certain human family lines for at least 2 centuries, perhaps significantly longer, and which requires nothing from the outside world to perform its function. It was written into the genome before the first cell divided. It waited there in the precise chemical architecture of a life that had not yet begun, patient in the way that only things without consciousness can be patient, absolutely, infinitely, without awareness of the waiting and therefore without any possibility of ceasing to wait. The mechanism, described in the language of science rather than the language of what it actually means, is as follows. The PRNP gene codes for a protein. In the correctly folded form, this protein performs functions not yet completely understood by the research community. In the misfolded form, the form that the mutation at codon 178 produces, replacing aspartic acid with asparagine in a substitution so geometrically small that it staggers the mind to consider it. The protein does something that nothing else in the known biological record does with such precision. It recruits healthy proteins and converts them. It reaches, as it were, into the surrounding tissue and teaches the healthy folded proteins to become misfolded. And those misfolded proteins teach others, and the chain continues and continues, and the region of the brain most densely targeted by this propagating catastrophe is the thalamus, the structure that sits at the center of the brain like a relay station, like a switch, like the gate through which sleep itself is permitted to enter the body. The gate is destroyed, not damaged, not impaired, destroyed systematically, incrementally, with the quiet thoroughness of something that has always known where it was going. When the gate closes permanently, the body cannot sleep. When the body cannot sleep, it fails. And the person inside that body, fully conscious, fully aware, watching themselves fail, cannot escape into the mercy of unconsciousness because that mercy has been deliberately, specifically, permanently removed. This mutation has existed for at least 250 years, possibly longer. We cannot know the true beginning because the beginning predates our ability to document it. And it exists now, tonight, in the genomes of people who do not yet know it is there, waiting, as it has always waited, for the decade in which it will begin. The horror is older than any individual it will destroy. He told himself it was nothing. The house had been telling him the same thing for 3 days. Houses lie. Marco Vianello was 41 years old, and he was, by most reasonable measurements, a happy man. Not the kind of happy that people perform for social media, with the carefully framed photographs and the captions about gratitude. Marco didn't own a smartphone and genuinely didn't understand why anyone would want one. He was happy in the quieter, sturdier sense. Happy the way a house is warm, from the inside out, in a way you only really notice when you step outside into the cold. He had a wife named Sophia who still laughed at his jokes even after 16 years, which Marco privately considered his greatest achievement. He had a daughter named Elena, 9 years old, who was at that particular stage of childhood where she found her father simultaneously mortifying and essential, which he also found funny. He worked as an accountant for a ceramics manufacturer in Venice, not the tourist Venice of gondolas and overpriced coffee, but the working Venice of early morning buses and men who carry lunch in metal containers. He was good at his job. He liked numbers because numbers told the truth, and Marco Vianello was the kind of man who preferred truth, even when it was inconvenient. He first noticed the problem on a Tuesday in October. Not a dramatic Tuesday. Not a Tuesday that announced itself with weather or strange events or any of the signals that, in retrospect, we might like to have seen. It was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind that makes up most of a life, the plain-bred days that you move through without noticing, and that only become significant when something inside them begins to go wrong. Marco went to bed at 11:15. He was tired, actually tired, the good kind, the earned kind that comes from a full day of real work. He kissed Sophia on the shoulder because she was already asleep. He turned off the lamp. He lay in the specific dark of his bedroom, which had a particular quality that he loved. The way the streetlight came through the curtains at an angle, throwing a thin stripe of amber across the ceiling. He'd looked at that stripe of light nearly every night for 16 years. It was one of the small, familiar pleasures that constitute a life. He lay there, and lay there, and somewhere around 1:30 in the morning he thought, "That's strange." Not alarmed, not frightened, just mildly, drowsily puzzled, the way you might be if you reached for your coffee and found the cup empty when you were certain you just poured it. He couldn't sleep. He was tired. He was comfortable. The room was dark and quiet, and Sophia was breathing beside him with that slow, deep rhythm that usually carried him under two, like a tide. But the tide wasn't coming. He told himself he'd had too much coffee. He'd been stressed about a deadline. He'd eaten dinner too late. He constructed a small, sensible architecture of explanation and laid himself down inside it and stared at the stripe of amber on the ceiling until the alarm went off at 6:45. The explanation was comfortable. He believed it completely. He had no reason not to. That was Tuesday. The first wrong thing, noticed and dismissed. There are people who move through the world and leave no impression, like fingers dragged through water. Marco Vianello was not one of them. He was the kind of person who accumulated history the way certain houses accumulate warmth, not because anything spectacular happened there, but because so much living happened there, so much of the daily accumulation of love and argument and cooking and laughter, and the 10,000 small transactions that constitute a real life. His mother, Anna, had died when Marco was 34. Pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal, 4 months from diagnosis to end. He'd sat with her through the last 2 weeks and held her hand and talked to her about nothing important, the ceramics plant, Elena's new drawings, the weather, because there was nothing important left to say, and the unimportant things were what she needed. What he'd remembered from those 2 weeks, and what he'd never quite told anyone, was that his mother's eyes had been strange in the last days. Not clouded, not dimmed, strange in a particular way that he couldn't name, a kind of expression that occupied her face continuously, as though she were listening for something. He'd asked the hospice nurse about it. The nurse had said, "Some patients experience vivid hallucinations in the final stage, particularly visual ones. It's a normal part of the process. She'd said it with the practiced gentleness of someone who has delivered this information many times, and Marco had accepted it because there was nothing else to do with it, and because the alternative, that his mother was seeing something real, something he couldn't see, in the room with them, was a thought he was not prepared to hold. His mother's father had died the same way, and her father's brother, and a great-aunt whose name Marco knew only from a genealogy his grandmother had kept in a box beneath the kitchen sink. Lucia Vianello, died 1937, cause of death listed as neurological deterioration, which was what they called it then because the specific name for it wouldn't be formally established until 1986. But Marco didn't know any of that on the Wednesday after the first sleepless Tuesday. On Wednesday, he went to work and made a small error in a spreadsheet, caught it immediately, corrected it, noted it with mild irritation. He ate his lunch on a bench near the water. He watched a tourist try to photograph a pigeon, and he smiled at the pigeon's complete indifference to the occasion. He went home. He helped Alina with her arithmetic, which she was struggling with, and which he found he could explain patiently, the way his mother had explained it to him. He went to bed at 11. He was still awake at 3. This time, he thought, I should probably see the doctor. And then, it's only been 2 nights. 2 nights is nothing. Everybody has 2 bad nights. He rolled onto his side and watched the amber stripe on the ceiling. Sophia slept. Alina slept. The whole building slept, and the street below, and probably the whole city, and Marco lay in the specific silence of being the only waking person in a sleeping world and thought about the ceramics plant, and whether he'd caught all the errors in the Morty account, and tried to remember the last time he'd slept well, and couldn't quite pin it down, which seemed strange now that he was trying to remember, because he'd always been a good sleeper, always. His mother's eyes, that particular expression. He put the thought away. He had no idea why it had surfaced. He put it away firmly and watched the ceiling until the alarm went off. His mother's face, the second wrong detail, still ignorable. By the end of the first week, Marco had assembled a very thorough explanation for everything that was happening to him, and he was mostly satisfied with it. The way you can be mostly satisfied with a meal that isn't quite right, but that you're too hungry to send back. Work stress was the foundation. The Morty account had been a nightmare for 3 months, and the client was the kind of person who called on Saturdays and expected detailed answers. And Marco had been absorbing that pressure with the specific competence of a man who does not complain, which is another way of saying he had been swallowing it whole and wondering where it went. There was also the thing with Sophia's mother, who had been diagnosed with something ambiguous in her knee that required the kind of doctor's appointments that Sophia had to drive 2 hours for, which meant Marco was doing the school runs and the shopping and the cooking on top of the work. And he was fine with it, genuinely fine, not performing fine, but fine things still cost something. So stress, of course he wasn't sleeping. Stress does that. It wires you up, keeps the circuits running when they ought to be dark and quiet. He'd read an article about it once. Cortisol, the body's alarm system staying triggered after the alarm had stopped. Completely normal, treatable with exercise, which he wasn't getting enough of, and reduced caffeine, which he'd already cut back on, and a general approach of not catastrophizing things that were, objectively, fine. He was fine, he would sleep tonight. He did not sleep that night, or the next. On the 9th day without real sleep, and by real sleep he meant more than the shallow, disjointed 20-minute intervals that had started occurring, dreams that felt less like dreams than like radio signals from a station he couldn't quite tune, fragmentary and strained, and gone the moment he tried to hold them. He sat at his kitchen table at 4 in the morning and did something he hadn't done in years. He Googled his symptoms. This is always a mistake. Everyone knows it's always a mistake. You put "can't sleep" into a search engine, and within 6 links you are either dying of 12 separate neurological conditions, or you are experiencing normal adult stress and need to reduce your screen time. Marco knew this. He was a reasonable man. He typed it anyway. He sat there reading for 40 minutes in the blue light of his laptop while his family slept around him. He read about stress-induced insomnia, about sleep apnea, about restless leg syndrome, about depression. He read about cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which sounded like something he might actually try. He read about melatonin. He almost closed the laptop. Instead, and he could not have told you why, could not have explained the particular pull of it, he typed something else into the search bar. He typed, fatal familial insomnia. He'd heard the term once. Years ago, in a documentary he'd half-watched while doing something else. He couldn't remember why it had surfaced now. Probably just the algorithm, suggesting things adjacent to what he'd been reading. Probably nothing. The first result loaded. He read the first paragraph. He read it again. He closed the laptop. His hands were steady. He was a reasonable man, and reasonable men do not conclude after 9 mildly bad nights that they have a fatal prion disease. He got up. He made coffee. He watched the canal from the kitchen window go from black to gray in the early morning light, and he thought about the Morty account, and about Alina's arithmetic, and about whether Sophia would be home for dinner. He thought about his mother's eyes for only a moment. Then he put that away too. The rationalization cracks. Something has gotten through. He made the appointment for Friday. The decision itself was nothing. 5 minutes on the phone with the clinic, a polite assistant, an appointment for 3:30 in the afternoon. Small and ordinary. The kind of thing you do a dozen times in an adult life without thinking about it. Call the doctor, get reassured, go home. Marco had no reason to believe this visit would be different from any other, and the logical part of his brain, the part that had kept him functional and competent and mildly happy for 41 years, was working hard to ensure the rest of him believed this too. The doctor's name was Dr. Renato Caruso. He was perhaps 55, with the particular exhausted competence of a general practitioner who has heard everything and remained unshocked by all of it. He asked questions. Marco answered them. He described the insomnia carefully, using the accountant's precision he brought to everything. Onset approximately 10 days ago. Total sleep per night now approximately 90 minutes in fragmented intervals. No medications. No prior history of sleep disorders. Minor work stress but nothing unusual. No depression that he was aware of. No anxiety beyond what the situation itself was generating. Dr. Caruso nodded throughout, writing, "And you are otherwise in good health." "Yes," Marco said, "I think so." Family history of sleep disorders. The question landed in a particular way. Marco noticed it landing, noticed the slight arrest in his breathing, the way his body registered something before his mind caught up. He said, "My mother at the end when she was ill. She had trouble sleeping, but that was the cancer." Dr. Caruso wrote something. "Anyone else in the family?" "My grandfather, I think, but he was old." The doctor looked at him for a moment with the kind of measured assessment that good doctors perform so smoothly you almost miss it. Then he said, "Let's start with the basics. I'd like you to have some blood work done and keep a sleep diary this week. If things don't improve, we can look at other possibilities." He wrote a prescription for something mild, something to help Marco get through the next week while the information accumulated. He smiled in the reassuring way of someone who has done this 10,000 times. Marco walked out of the office into the October afternoon and stood on the steps for a moment, squinting in the pale light. He had a prescription. He had a plan. This was all completely manageable. He thought about his mother's eyes. He thought about his grandfather, whom he'd never met, who had died in 1978, 3 years before Marco was born. He thought about the website he'd read at 4 in the morning, the first line of the article, which he could recite from memory because it was the kind of sentence that stays. Fatal familial insomnia is an extremely rare inherited prion disease with no known cure or effective treatment. He thought, "I am 41 years old. I am a reasonable man. I have stress and I have a prescription and I have an appointment for follow-up blood work and everything is going to be fine. He walked to the bus stop. He took the bus home. He did not fill the prescription. And here is the part nobody talks about. The part left out of every news report, every official account, every interview. Because the people who knew, the ones who were actually there, made a decision. They decided some things were better left unsaid. They were wrong. And tonight, you're going to hear why. She noticed it on a Tuesday. 3 days later, it had a name in a police report. Sophia noticed the chair first. It was the chair at the kitchen table, Marco's chair. The one with the slight wobble on the left rear leg that neither of them had fixed, because fixing it would require moving the table, and moving the table would require moving the refrigerator, and the refrigerator had been in that corner since 1987, when Sophia's parents had bought the apartment. And some things are easier to simply live with. Marco always sat in that chair. Had sat in it every morning for 16 years, with his coffee and his newspaper. An actual newspaper, folded in a specific way that Sophia found endearing and slightly baffling. The chair was empty at 7:15 on Monday morning. Sophia stood at the counter with her own coffee and looked at the empty chair for a moment. Then she looked at the newspaper on the table, folded, unread. Then she looked at the hallway that led to the bedroom from which there was no sound. She went and checked. Marco was there in the bed, lying on his back with his eyes open. He looked at her when she came in. His eyes were open, and his expression was alert in a way that sleep should have softened. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "Some," he said. He had not slept. She could see that he had not slept. There is a particular quality to someone who has not slept, not a tired quality, but an illuminated quality, a kind of pressed forward presence, as though the surface of consciousness has been pushed too close to the skin. Marco had that quality. She had been noticing it for 2 weeks, and each morning it was more apparent than the morning before. She said, "You should call Dr. Caruso again." "I have an appointment," he said. He didn't. She found this out later. The day passed. Elena went to school. Marco went to work. Sophia went about the business of the day, the grocery shopping, the call to the specialist about her mother's knee, the small domestic accumulation of a life. Everything was in its correct position. Everything was functioning. She walked past Elena's room at 2 in the afternoon and noticed that Elena's small stuffed rabbit, the one she'd had since she was 3, the one she'd stopped taking to bed 2 years ago because she was too old for that, but that still sat on the shelf above the desk, was facing the wrong way, facing the wall. Sophia stopped in the doorway and looked at it. The rabbit faced the wall. She couldn't remember moving it. Elena wasn't home. Marco had left before 8. She went in and turned it around. She didn't mention it to anyone. That night, at 2 in the morning, she woke to the sound of Marco moving through the apartment. She lay still and listened. The kitchen, the living room, the bathroom, the kitchen again. The soft sound of his footsteps on the tile, going nowhere, returning to nowhere, going again. She didn't call to him. She wasn't sure why. She lay in the dark and listened to her husband walking through their home like someone looking for something that wasn't going to be there. And she stared at the ceiling and waited for morning in the particular silence of a woman who knows something is wrong and is not yet ready to know what it is. The rabbit facing the wall. No explanation. She told her sister Marta on the phone, on a Thursday, in the sort of voice people use when they are describing something worrying in a way that insists it is probably nothing. "He's not sleeping," Sophia said. "For weeks now, he's barely sleeping at all." "He should see a doctor," Marta said. "He's seen a doctor." "What did the doctor say?" "Stress," Sophia said. "Blood work, sleep diary." A pause. The blood work came back normal. There was the particular silence of a sister who is calculating how concerned to sound. "Marco is fine," Marta said finally. "He works too hard. Tell him to take a week off." Sophia said yes, she would. She said yes, probably you're right. She said it in the way women say things that are not the thing they mean. She got off the phone and stood at the kitchen window and watched the canal for a while. The thing she had not told Marta, the thing she found she couldn't quite say aloud, as though saying it would give it a weight it didn't yet officially have, was that Marco had begun talking in the night. Not words exactly. Sounds that were almost words. Sounds that kept her on the edge of waking because they seemed to be directed at something, seemed to be in response to something. And she would strain to hear what he was responding to, and of course there was nothing. There was never anything, but the sound of him responding to it went on and on in the dark. She had looked it up herself. She had done the thing that Marco had done at 4 in the morning 2 weeks ago, the thing she'd vowed not to do, and she had read the same article and then other articles, and then a research paper that she had mostly not understood but whose abstract she had understood very clearly. And she had sat with that understanding in the bathroom for a long time with the door closed and the light on. His mother, the word neurological on the death certificate, the way Anna's eyes had been at the end in those last days, that particular listening expression. That was the word, listening, as though she were hearing something no one else could hear. Sophia went to bed at 10:30. She lay in the dark beside Marco, who lay on his back with his eyes open, and she matched her breathing to his, slowly, deliberately, as though she could breathe sleep into him from the outside. His eyes were open. He was looking at the ceiling. And then he turned his head and looked at her in the dark, and he smiled in the way he always smiled at her, warm and genuine and his, and she thought, this is still him. This is still my husband. He said very quietly, Sophia, do you hear that? She said, hear what? And Marco turned his head back to the ceiling and said nothing else. She will not hear it. She will never hear it. He is already the only person in the room who can. What you just heard was only the beginning. She found the notebook on a Saturday. Marco had gone to the pharmacy. He was still going to the pharmacy, still operating in the world as a man who had errands and obligations and reasons to leave the apartment, though the reasons were becoming less certain and his returns more difficult to time. He had been gone for an hour. He had gone to a pharmacy 4 blocks away. The notebook was on the kitchen table, under the newspaper, tucked not quite completely out of sight. Sophia noticed the edge of it when she moved the newspaper to wipe down the table. She sat down and opened it. Marco's handwriting. The careful, slightly tilted handwriting she had been reading for 20 years, on grocery lists and birthday cards, and the notes he left in Alina's lunch box. Small notes that said things like, I am proud of you for trying, and the joke on the other side of this note is, knock knock, and the knock knock joke was always bad. The notebook contained dates and times, every night listed in order. The time he got into bed, the time he last remembered looking at the clock, the time he estimated the first fragmentary sleep arrived, the duration of the next one if there was a next one. A sleep diary, rigorously maintained. Alongside the times, notes, not elaborate, short, single lines, dreamed of water, not quite dreaming, woke to sound that was not there. Hands felt not mine for a moment. Saw something at the window, angle of light, I think. Counted ceiling for 2 hours. Called out. Sophia did not wake, perhaps better. She sat with the notebook open. She read every page. There were 23 pages. The last entry was from that morning, written at 5:42 a.m. while she was still asleep in the next room. Total sleep last week, possibly 4 hours. Fragmented. The quality is wrong. I don't think I am getting below the surface. Something in me is staying at the surface, and I don't know why I can say that, but I can say it. It is true. There is a surface I cannot go under. Sophia is worried. I am not going to tell her what I found. I am going to call the doctor Monday. I am going to be reasonable about this. Then, in smaller writing, as an afterthought below, my grandfather died of this. I need to find out about my grandfather. Sophia closed the notebook. She put it back where she found it. She wiped down the table. When Marco came home from the pharmacy, she asked him how it was out, and he said fine, cold but fine. And she said she thought she'd make soup for dinner, and he said that sounded good. One sentence. Plain, devastating, unexplained. She did not tell him she had read it because there was nothing to say that would change what was inside it. She noticed it on a Tuesday. 3 days later, it had a name in a police report. October 1765, Venice, Italy. This is on record. It begins here. Giacomo Vianello, cloth merchant, age 43. First documented case of what would not receive a formal name for 221 years. The family records, held in the archive of the Church of San Barnaba and partially digitized in 2004, describe the onset in terms available to an 18th century parish priest, afflicted with a sleeplessness of an unusual and progressive nature, accompanied by trembling of the extremities, confusion of speech, and visions of a distressing character. The progression took 9 months. Cause of death recorded as fever and madness. He had 4 children. 3 survived to adulthood. At least 2 carried the mutation. June 1798, Venice, Italy. Giacomo's grandson, Pietro Vianello, age 40. The parish record from this period is more detailed because the priest who kept it had an interest in medicine. He notes, Pietro sleeps not at all in the final weeks, and yet is not fully waking. He sits at the table and speaks to persons absent. His eyes do not close. He is, I believe, in a state between the 2 conditions, neither sleeping nor waking. And this state is destroying him with a thoroughness and consistency that suggests, to my eye, something systematic rather than accidental. Pietro died in 42 weeks. His wife was pregnant with their 3rd child when he died. Giuseppe Vianello, nephew of Pietro Vianello, transcribed account, date estimated 1830. My uncle Pietro at the end, his eyes were open all the time, day and night. We would put wet cloth on them to keep them from drying because he could not blink as he should. He was not mad, not truly. He could say our names. He would ask for water, but he was not in the room with us any longer. He was somewhere else looking at something we could not see. He died on a Thursday in June. My father said he looked in the final moment like a man who finally understood something. I don't know what that means. I have thought about it my whole life. Giuseppe Vianello died 40 years later in the same manner. He had 3 children. The mutation does not ask permission. It does not negotiate. It passes with a coin flip probability to every child born into its lineage, and it waits, and it has always waited, and it is still waiting now. The documentation stretches back 250 years. It has never stopped. November 1984, Bologna, Italy. Silvano, a member of the Venetian family that would become the most extensively documented FFI lineage in the medical record, age 53. A man who knew, because his father had died of it, and his grandfather had died of it, and his great-uncle had died of it, that something was inside him. He had lived 40 years knowing that the coin had been flipped at his conception, and that he did not know the result. He knew only what the result would mean. He went to Dr. Ignazio Reuter in Bologna in November 1984, reporting the onset of insomnia and what he described, in the documented consultation notes, as an increase in the frequency of episodes of inexplicable panic. He was precise in his descriptions. He had been waiting for these symptoms. He had prepared. Over the following months, Dr. Reuter referred Silvano to neurological specialists who documented the following progression: initial insomnia advancing to complete inability to sustain sleep, progressive hyperthermia, elevated body temperature, impotence, constipation, increasingly severe autonomic dysregulation. Silvano lost the ability to regulate his own body temperature. His blood pressure became unpredictable. He sweat continuously. He lost weight so rapidly that within 6 months, he was unrecognizable in photographs taken from 8 months prior. Dr. Ignazio Reuter, neurologist, Bologna, 1985. What I remember most is that he was never confused in the way that neurological degeneration usually produces confusion. He was aware. He could tell you what he was experiencing with great precision. He said to me, in one of the last consultations, I can feel myself receding. I am here, but I am further back than I was yesterday. Tomorrow I will be further back again. He had no language of his own for it, so he made one. Receding. That word has stayed with me for 35 years. Silvano died in 1984, 37 weeks after onset. Before his death, he donated his brain to science. His brain went to Dr. Pierluigi Gambetti at Case Western Reserve University, where its examination contributed to the first formal identification of the disease in 1986. The name given to it was fatal familial insomnia. The name is accurate in every particular. There is no gentler name available. Silvano had children. 2 of them carry the mutation. They are alive today. His final recorded words to his physician: "Make sure someone learns something from this. What you need to understand about prions is this: they are not alive. They cannot be killed. They are not bacteria, not viruses, not any form of pathogen that the immune system is equipped to recognize and fight. They are, in the precise language of biochemistry, misfolded proteins, structural aberrations in molecules that occur naturally throughout the brain. They require no external agent. They carry no genetic material of their own. They are, in every conventional definition, inert. And yet they propagate, and yet they convert, and yet they destroy." Dr. Elena Vazic, behavioral psychologist, FFI Research Consortium 2021. The aspect of FFI that patients and families find most difficult to process is not the prognosis. People can absorb a prognosis, even a terrible one, but the passivity of it. There is no external enemy. There is nothing to fight, nothing to treat, nothing to negotiate with. The disease is already inside, has always been inside, and the insight that you have been carrying a death sentence since the first cell divided. That insight tends to produce a specific category of psychological response that I haven't encountered in any other terminal diagnosis. The PRNP gene mutation responsible for FFI involves a substitution at codon 178, asparagine replacing aspartic acid, combined with methionine at codon 129. This combination determines 2 things: the development of FFI rather than a related prion disease called Gerstmann-Straussler-Schenker syndrome, and the rate of progression. The methionine homozygosity at codon 129 predicts a faster course, 6 to 12 months. Heterozygosity predicts a longer one, up to 32 months, though the endpoint does not change. Currently, 47 families worldwide have been identified as carrying the mutation. The actual number is almost certainly higher. Cases in countries with limited access to advanced neurological diagnostics are missed, mislabeled, buried in records under categories like unknown encephalopathy or rapid onset dementia. The Venetian family remains the most extensively documented lineage. Approximately 100 identified members, spanning 9 generations, spread across Italy, Australia, the United States, and Brazil. The genetic test exists. A blood test can tell a carrier with certainty whether they have inherited the mutation. Some members of affected families take the test, many do not. Those who do not give the same reason when asked. Knowing, they say, changes nothing except the knowing. What I am about to tell you is documented. It is on record. It exists in files that are technically public but practically inaccessible. I found them. I read every page. You need to hear what is inside, because what happened once is still happening. What it cannot record is what happened inside Marco's chest when he read it. The specific weight of knowing that someone had survived this before him and told no one. He found the genealogy on a Sunday night in November, 3 weeks after the notebook, 6 weeks after the first sleepless Tuesday. His grandmother had kept it Nonna Rosaria, dead 15 years, but her apartment had been absorbed into the family furniture and boxes when she passed, and the boxes had gone to his mother's. And when his mother died, the boxes had come to Marco and Sophia's storage unit, where they had sat, taped shut, for 7 years. Marco had thought about them occasionally with the mild guilt of a person who intends to go through something but never quite does. He'd thought about them on a Sunday afternoon when he had nothing to do, and the storage unit was only 20 minutes away, and there was no particular reason not to go. He sat in the storage unit on a folding chair he found in one of the other boxes, and he opened Nana Rosaria's things. The genealogy was in a biscuit tin. He almost missed it. A folded stack of papers, handwritten, going back 8 generations. Names and dates, marriages and children and causes of death, in the careful hand of his grandmother and her mother before her and her mother before that. He found Giacomo Vianello at the top of the tree, 1722 to 1765. The cause of death, written in faded ink, feber e confusion della mente, fever and confusion of the mind. He found Pietro. He found Pietro's son who had died of the same thing, and his son, and his brother, and a great aunt named Lucia in 1937, cause of death, deteriorazione neurologica, and 3 cousins in Brazil, noted in the margin in different handwriting, dated 1963, with a single word beside their names that had been partially crossed out in a way that suggested someone had decided the word shouldn't be there, and then decided to leave it there anyway, blacked but legible. Maledizione. Curse. Marco sat in the storage unit in November and held the papers, and understood that he was not looking at a coincidence or a collection of ordinary tragedies. He was looking at a pattern that was 250 years old, and that had moved through his family like a river, and that had arrived, finally, at him. He called Dr. Caruso from the storage unit, got voicemail, left a message that was more controlled than he felt. He was still a reasonable man, even now, even in the storage unit with the biscuit tin in his lap and the genealogy in his hands. He left a message saying he'd like to discuss something and could they meet this week. He kept his voice level. He hung up. He sat there for a while. He thought about Alina, 9 years old, 50% probability. He did not want to think about Alina. He thought about it anyway because he was a man who preferred truth, even when it was this. He cannot simply leave. He has always been inside it. The week that followed was the best week in 2 months. This is important. It happened, and it is important that it happened, because it shows what hope can do to a person who has found a reason to hold on to it. Dr. Caruso, when they met on Wednesday, took the genealogy seriously enough to refer Marco to a neurologist at the University of Padua, a Dr. Fossati, who specialized in prion diseases and who had, Dr. Caruso said carefully, some experience with FFI specifically. There was a process. Genetic testing was available. Nothing was confirmed yet. Nothing was certain. And something in this, the structure of it, the appointment making, the referral letter, the specific forward motion of being a patient with a plan settled Marco in a way that nothing had for weeks. That Thursday night he slept 4 hours straight. 4 consecutive hours, no fragmentation, no surfacing. He woke at 5 and lay there in the gray pre-dawn light, feeling the mild astonishment of a man who had forgotten what rest felt like, and then remembered. He told Sophia over breakfast. He told her about the genealogy, the appointment, Dr. Fossati, all of it. He told her carefully and completely, watching her face while he did. Sophia listened. She didn't cry, though he could see it cost her something not to. She reached across the table and put her hand on his arm and said, "We'll find out, and then we'll deal with what we find out. That's all." He thought, this is why I married this woman. He thought, I sleep for 4 hours, and I think maybe it will be okay. He took Alina to school on Friday, and she was annoyed because he was walking too slowly, and she was going to be late, and also her backpack zipper was broken, and she was very clear about the magnitude of all of this, and he listened to her with the particular fondness of a man who has recently been reminded that the ordinary complaints of a 9-year-old are the most beautiful sound in the world. He thought, Alina is 9, she is fine, she is going to be fine. That night he slept 2 hours, Fragmented, wrong. Saturday 40 minutes total, wrong. Sunday, he did not sleep at all. Not a minute, not a fragment. He lay in the dark and his eyes would not close, and the ceiling was very bright somehow, brighter than it had any business being. And there was a sound that he could hear at the edge of hearing that might have been traffic or might have been something else. And Sophia slept beside him, breathing in the rhythm he loved. And he watched the ceiling, and the hope from Thursday was gone so completely it might have never been there. What replaced it was not fear. It was something quieter than fear and more final. Something that sat in his chest like a stone placed with great deliberateness, in the precise spot designed to hold it. The hope is gone. What replaced it is the truth. November 14 th 2019, 3:17 a.m. Marco was in the hallway. Sophia woke because of the absence of him beside her, the specific negative space of a person who should be there and isn't. And she went to the doorway of the bedroom and looked down the hall, and Marco was standing at the end of it, near the front door, with both hands flat against the wall. His back was to her. He was wearing the t-shirt and shorts he slept in. He was standing very still. She said, "Marco." He turned around. His face was the face she knew, her husband's face, the face she'd been reading for 20 years. And his eyes were open, fully open, with that particular expression she'd been unable to name for weeks and that she now had a word for, reading his grandmother's research in the middle of the night, vigilant. His eyes were vigilant, watchful, as though something he couldn't look away from was constantly at the edge of his vision. "Come back to bed," she said. He said, "Did you know that the thalamus is about the size of a walnut?" He said it the way you'd say something you'd been reading about and found interesting, the conversational tone of a man sharing a fact that had caught his attention. Right in the center of everything. Everything that comes in goes through it first. Sleep, pain, attention, everything. And it's about the size of a walnut. He turned back to the wall. He pressed his hands flat against it again. "I can feel them," he said. "The holes, I think they have a texture." Sophia stood in the doorway. The hallway was cold. The apartment made the sounds apartments make at 3 in the morning, the refrigerator, the pipes, the building settling onto its old foundations. Marco stood at the end of the hall with his hands on the wall, and she didn't know if he was awake or asleep because the question had stopped having an obvious answer sometime in the last week. The boundary had dissolved. He was neither one nor the other. He was in the space between. She went to him. She took his hand gently, the way you take the hand of someone standing at the edge of something. His hand was warm. It closed around hers firmly, purposefully, and that was still him, that grip, that particular strength, and she said, "Come to bed, Marco," and he let her lead him back to the bedroom. He lay down. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep, but he lay there and she lay beside him, and she held his hand in the dark until gray morning came through the curtains. She was already composing the call she was going to make Monday morning, the call to the neurologist in Padua, and then the other call, the one she did not yet know how to make, to the genetic counselor about Elena. Their 9-year-old daughter has a 50% chance of carrying this. Sophia is already counting. What you just heard was only the beginning. Dr. Fossati at the University of Padua was a careful man. He was in his late 50s, with the specific restrained affect of a specialist who has learned that his first job before medicine is steadiness. Patients read their doctors the way people read weather. They are constantly looking for signs, interpreting every microexpression, measuring the temperature of every pause. Dr. Fossati had learned this and had calibrated himself accordingly. Not cold, not falsely warm, but steady, present. Readable as competent and honest, which was the most useful thing he could offer. He met with Marco and Sophia on a Monday in November. He had the genealogy. He had Dr. Caruso's notes. He had the sleep diary, which Marco had brought without being asked. He examined Marco carefully, neurological assessment, cognitive tests. Observations Marco understood were designed to measure what was already beginning to fail. He asked questions in a particular sequence that Marco could see was designed to establish a baseline for comparison. After the examination, they sat in Dr. Fossati's office. Outside the window, Padua in November. Rain, gray, the specific melancholy of a northern Italian city in late autumn. Dr. Fossati said, "I'd like to order a genetic test. It won't change the management if the result is positive. There is, I want to be honest with you, no disease-modifying treatment currently available, but it will confirm the diagnosis and allow us to think about the next steps in terms of supportive care and family planning." Family planning. Sophia's hand tightened on Marco's. He felt it. He didn't look at her because he knew if he looked at her, he would not be able to stay inside the useful composure he had managed to construct for this appointment. He said, "If it's positive, what are we looking at in terms of timeline?" Dr. Fossati was quiet for a moment. The course of the disease varies. On average, once symptoms are established, which I believe they already are, progression to later stages occurs over a period of months. I want to emphasize that there is ongoing research and there are experimental approaches being explored, but I don't want to overstate what is currently available. Months. Marco heard the word and understood it the way you understand a very cold temperature, not abstractly, but physically in the body. He thought about the ceramics plant, the Morty account, the arithmetic homework, the rabbit on the shelf, which Alina had moved back to face the right direction, and which Sophia hadn't mentioned again. He thought about the biscuit tin in the storage unit. He thought about Giacomo Vianello in 1765, and Pietro's son, and the unbroken chain of it, 250 years of the same death moving through the same blood. He thought, this is the last ordinary thought I will have. He didn't know that yet, but looking back later, Sophia would identify this moment, the Padua office, the rain on the window, Dr. Fossati's steady voice, as the last moment in which Marco was still entirely himself. The last moment he existed fully in the same world as everyone else in the room. After this, she said, he was still Marco, but he was Marco from further and further away. He has crossed into the territory where there is no return. That was the last normal thought he would have. I do not use the word normal lightly. I use it the way one might use the word sure, while watching it disappear behind you. I must make you understand something about the nature of the boundary, the precise, physical, chemical boundary that separates the waking mind from the sleeping one. Because until you understand it, you cannot understand what its dissolution means. Sleep is not unconsciousness. This is the great misapprehension. Sleep is a state of organized activity, electrical, chemical, purposeful activity, in which the brain performs functions of extraordinary complexity. The consolidation of memory, the regulation of emotion, the repair of cellular damage, the rhythmic cycling through stages that process the experience of the day into the architecture of the self. To be denied sleep is not to be denied rest. It is to be denied the mechanism by which the self is reconstituted each night. And when the self is not reconstituted, when the materials that maintain coherence are not processed, sorted, filed, integrated, what remains? I will tell you what remains. I will tell you because I have been inside this now, inside the dissolution. And I can still, at this moment, at this particular hour in this particular night, still report with some approximation of accuracy what I observe. What remains when sleep is withheld long enough is the surface of the mind, nothing deeper. The surface, the immediate, reactive, stimulus and response layer of consciousness, stays intact while everything beneath it begins to lose coherence. You can answer questions. You can recognize faces. You can, with enormous effort, read a document and understand its content. But something behind those functions, something that used to feel like yourself, like the continuous thread that runs from yesterday through today into tomorrow, begins to thin and fray. And this is the part that I find most difficult to describe with the precision it deserves. You are aware of it happening. You can see it, the fraying. You feel the thread pulling, thinning. You reach for a memory and it is there, you can touch it, verify its presence, but it no longer belongs to you in the way it once did. It is a document you can read. It was a lived experience. The difference is significant. The difference is everything. When did this begin precisely? I have asked myself this question, and I cannot answer it with confidence, which is itself a symptom of what I am describing. The night in November with my hands on the wall, was I awake? Was I something else? The boundary that once separated those states with clean certainty has become permeable. Things move through it in both directions. Things come into the waking world that should remain in the dreaming one. And things that should ground me, the specific, tangible reality of the apartment, Sophia's breathing, Alina's drawings pinned to the kitchen wall, sometimes feel, for moments, provisional, as though they might not be there if I turned too quickly to verify them. I know this is a symptom. I know the name of what this is. This knowledge does not protect me from it. This is the specific cruelty of my condition. I am a reasonable man watching myself become unreasonable, with perfect, unflinching accuracy and no means of intervention. Was that real? I am asking you, was any of it real? The narrator cannot answer that question. That is the answer. I must confess to you now, that there are things I have begun to see which I have not reported to the doctor. Not because I believe them to be real. Not because I have lost, entirely, the capacity to evaluate, but because describing them requires a stability of language that I am finding more difficult, more effortful, to maintain. Let me try. The figures, I see them at the periphery. Specifically at the periphery, which strongly suggests, a neurological explanation, as peripheral visual processing is among the first things disrupted by thalamic damage. And I know this, I have read this. I have been reading everything because reading is still available to me even when sleep is not. The figures are not threatening in any way that I can articulate. They stand. They watch. They are approximately human in shape, and the approximation itself is the most disturbing element. Not the wrongness of them, but the near rightness. They occupy the doorways and the corners and the place at the end of the bed where Sophia does not sleep. And when I turn to look at them directly, they are not there, which, I tell you again, I understand entirely. I understand it is the thalamus. I understand it is stage 2. I understand what I am seeing. The sounds are more difficult to explain clinically. There is a sound, rhythmic, low, like breathing that is not anyone's breathing in this apartment. I have checked. I have gotten up and checked every source of that sound and found nothing. And yet the sound, and yet it continues. And I find myself listening to it with an attention that I would prefer not to give it, because the attention it requires takes something from the attention available for everything else. And what is left, what remains after the listening, is thinner than what preceded it. But do not for one moment believe that you are simply listening to a story. What I am telling you is real. It has always been real. And the reason I know this, the reason I cannot stop, is that it is still happening, right now, as I speak these words to you in the dark. If you are still with me, if you have not yet turned away, write in the comments. The walls remember. Let me know I am not alone in this. Because I must be honest with you, I am beginning at the edges to feel alone in this in a way I cannot entirely explain. Sophia is here. Alina is here. Dr. Fasadi is available on Monday. All of this is true. And yet, there is a sense in which what is happening to me is happening in a place that no one else can enter. A room that has only one door, and the door opens from the inside. The sound again. I have stopped trying to find its source. The question the narrator cannot answer about themselves. Am I still, in any meaningful sense, myself? December. The genetic test returned positive. I was not surprised. This itself is worth noting. I was not surprised. I had already accommodated the result. In some part of my understanding, it had already been true for weeks, perhaps for 41 years, and the document merely confirmed what the body already knew. The result sits in a folder. I have not opened the folder again. Sophia has read it. Dr. Fasadi has read it. I have read it once, and I do not need to read it again because the information is already. I lose the word. This is new. This is the thing I want to note clearly while I still can, while notation is still possible. I lose words now. Specific words. I reach for them with the precision I have always had, the precision of a man who lived with numbers and trusted language to be equally reliable, and sometimes the word is simply absent. The shelf where it lived is there. The shelf is empty. Obsession, no, not obsession. Observation. I observe the following clinically about my current state. Sleep last week, less than 2 hours total. Fragmented, not restorative. There is no restoration occurring at any point in the cycle. I know what restored sleep feels like. I know it the way you know a color that you are no longer able to see. I can describe it. I cannot access it. Weight loss. Sophia says I have lost 9 kilograms. I do not notice it the way I would have noticed it before. I notice it abstractly as information. The figures more frequent. I have given up distinguishing them from the room's actual contents. This is not acquiescence. It is efficiency. Energy is finite. And guilt. Why do I say guilt? There is something that functions like guilt, except without a specific object. A guilt without an author. Unless the author is the mutation itself. Codon 178, asparagine replacing aspartic acid in the precise geometry of what I have always been. And I pass this to Alina with the same probability, the same flip of the same coin. Do not think of Alina. The same coin I did not choose. Do not think of Alina. The walls remember. The walls remember. They are still remembering now. But do not for one moment believe that you are simply listening to a story. What I am telling you is real. It has always been real. And the reason I know this, the reason I cannot stop, is that it is still happening. Right now, as I speak these words to you in the dark. And so my mind, what remained of it, turned at last to the question I had been circling for days. Not what had I seen, but what precisely had seen me. It is essential, at this juncture in the inquiry, to step back from the individual case, from the specificity of names and dates and documented progressions, and to consider the phenomenon of fatal familial insomnia in its totality, and more particularly, in the context of what it implies about the nature of biological existence itself. The mutation has existed for at minimum 250 years, quite possibly considerably longer. The first documented case, Giacomo Vianello in 1765, represents not the origin but merely the first point at which the record captures something that was already moving through the bloodline, already several generations established, already having claimed victims whose deaths were attributed to fever, to madness, to the will of God, to anything available to a pre-scientific mind that required an explanation for a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. Dr. Alexander Voss, Prion Research Institute, University of Zurich, 2019. What distinguishes the FFI mutation from most hereditary diseases is the precision of its targeting. The thalamus is not a general casualty of neurological deterioration. It is the specific structure that regulates the transition between waking and sleeping, the gate, if you will. The prion attacks this gate. In 47 documented families across 5 continents, it attacks this gate, specifically, every time. That consistency exceeds what we would expect from random pathological distribution. Consider the implications. Here is something that does not think, does not plan, does not experience time as we experience it, and yet which is found, through the entirely indifferent mechanism of natural variation and inheritance, the precise location in the human brain whose destruction produces the maximum possible suffering over the maximum possible conscious duration. A slower death would be kinder. A death that attacked cognition immediately would be kinder. Instead, the ability to think and feel and observe and understand is preserved, exquisitely, precisely preserved. while the single mechanism that provides relief from existence is systematically eliminated. We do not have language adequate to describe this. The temptation, the very human temptation, is to attribute intention to it, to say that it was designed, that something designed it, that there is a pattern here that requires a designer. The temptation must be resisted. The mutation requires no intention. It requires only time and inheritance and the arithmetic of chance. And it has had 250 documented years of those things. And it will have the same number of years beyond this moment if nothing interrupts its passage. The research community is working. There are trials. There is a compound called Anal 138B that has shown promise in mouse models. There is antisense oligonucleotide therapy that targets the PRNP gene directly, reducing production of the protein altogether. There are investigators of enormous dedication and seriousness pursuing these avenues with the urgency they deserve. The mutation does not know this. It continues. And no external force is coming. The only intervention would have to come from within the same biology that produced the mutation. The disease progresses in 4 stages. This is documented. This is agreed upon by the medical literature, and there is no meaningful dispute about the stages themselves, only about the precise boundary between them, which blurs because the progression is continuous rather than discrete, a gradient rather than a series of steps, though the stages remain useful as a framework for conveying what cannot, in its totality, be fully conveyed. Stage 1, insomnia, progressive, advancing, initially intermittent and then constant, accompanied by panic attacks, which suggests something interesting, something that the clinical language of panic attacks perhaps understates. The body is aware at some subliminal level that something is wrong, and this awareness produces the alarm response, the flood of cortisol and adrenaline that evolution produced for situations requiring fight or flight. And the alarm keeps sounding because the situation requiring the response is not something from which one can flee, being located in the most inaccessible interior of the self. Duration, approximately 4 months. Stage 2, hallucinations and panic. The visual and auditory fabric of experience becomes unreliable. The boundary between the waking world and the dreaming one, already compromised by the thalamic damage, becomes insufficient to contain what should remain on the other side. Duration, approximately 5 months. Stage 3, rapid weight loss, inability to sleep entirely, dementia. The word dementia in this context requires examination. It does not indicate the dissolution of awareness. It indicates the dissolution of the framework within which awareness operates, the confusion of time, of sequence, of identity, while the core consciousness persists, looking out from within, fully aware that the framework is dissolving, unable to prevent it. Duration, approximately 3 months. Stage 4, dementia accelerates. The body, denied for months the repair functions that sleep provides, begins to fail systematically. The immune system becomes unreliable. The autonomic nervous system, which regulates breathing, blood pressure, body temperature, digestion, loses the precise calibration it requires. The heart and lungs continue because they are designed to continue as long as possible. The person inside them continues because they have no choice. And then over a period of days, the continuation ends. What is it like? The honest answer is, we do not know exactly, because those who have been inside stage 4 cannot report from it afterward, and those who have observed it from the outside have reported consistently that the patient's expression in the final days is, and this is the word that reappears in accounts across cultures, across centuries, across languages, attentive, as though listening to something, as though at the very end the mechanism destroyed by the disease is briefly, impossibly restored. We do not know what is heard in those final hours. We have no framework that would allow us to know. Language itself is insufficient. This is the honest border of what can be described. Others knew. This is the detail that requires emphasis. Others knew. Not the Vianello family specifically. though the family's awareness of its own pattern, encoded in crossed-out words in genealogy records, in the deliberate avoidance of the topic across generations, in the particular silence that descends in certain families around certain questions, constitutes a form of knowing. But before the family, before the documented record, before 1765, the prion diseases, the entire class of transmissible and hereditary spongiform encephalopathies, have analogues in the folklore of nearly every culture with a documented tradition. There are accounts in 16th century Italian chronicles of families in the Veneto region whose men died of a wasting condition that progressed through recognizable stages. First the sleeplessness, then the visions, then the wasting, then the death. There are accounts from Brazil, where branches of the Vianello lineage emigrated in the 19th century of the same progression, known in that community by a name that translates approximately as the disease of the watching. There are accounts from the Philippines, from Japan, from Argentina, from Ireland, each distinct in cultural specificity and identical in clinical description. Something in the human pattern recognition apparatus has always been aware that this thing exists. It has been named differently, variously, in every language available, and the naming has always failed to contain it, because it is not the kind of thing that names can contain. Dr. Elena Marchetti, medical historian, Bologna University, has documented 17 pre-scientific accounts of what she believes to be FFI cases across southern Europe. Her analysis, published in a 2018 paper whose title translates as "The Sleeping Death Before Its Name," includes the following observation that she asked me to read in full. In every pre-scientific account I have found, the disease is described not as a disease, not as an affliction from outside, but as a condition from within, a condition encoded in the blood. The communities that produced these accounts did not have the concept of genetics, but they had observed, across generations, that the condition followed blood. They were correct. They were correct. They had no mechanism to explain what they observed. They observed it anyway, and the observation was helpless. Knowing that the condition followed blood, knowing without understanding why, changed nothing. 250 years of watching, and the watching never stopped the progression of a single case. And the families that carry it now, 47 identified, an unknown number unidentified, are still watching. Some have tested, some have not. Some know tonight that they carry the mutation and are waiting, as Giacomo Vianello waited and Pietro Vianello waited and Silvano waited and Marco is waiting, for the decade in which the waiting becomes something else. The mutation does not know it is being watched. It does not know anything. It continues. What you just heard was only the beginning. Consider the scale, not the scale of the Vianello family, not even the scale of the 47 documented families and the unknown number beyond them, the scale of the mechanism itself. Prions were first described by Dr. Stanley Prusiner in the 1980s, work for which he received the Nobel Prize in 1997, and which was initially met with widespread scientific skepticism, because the proposition that a protein with no nucleic acid, no genetic material of any kind, could replicate and propagate and cause disease, violated every established principle of biology. It violated what biology had established as the categorical boundary between living and non-living agents of disease. And yet the evidence was incontrovertible, and yet the mechanism was real, and yet the skepticism required, eventually, to be abandoned. What Prusiner described was not merely a disease mechanism. He described, for the first time, a category of pathological agent that does not play by biological rules as they had been understood. The prion does not need to be alive to destroy the living. It does not need to carry instructions. It simply needs to be misfolded. And its misfolding is, by virtue of the geometry of protein-to-protein interaction, transferable. The correctly folded protein that encounters the misfolded one may, and in the right genetic context, will adopt the misfolded configuration, and that protein will transfer its new configuration to its neighbors. And the propagation continues. And the thalamus, in the person carrying the codon 178 mutation, is where this propagation concentrates. It concentrates there because the misfolded PRP in this specific mutation has a structural affinity for the specific proteins most concentrated in the thalamic tissue. This specificity, this precision, is not intelligence, it is chemistry. But it produces an outcome so specific, so consistently devastating, so perfectly targeted to the place in the human brain that controls the transition between waking and not waking, that the mind confronting this fact for the first time reaches, involuntarily, for the language of intention. There is no intention. The mutation does not intend. It propagates. It has always propagated. It will continue to propagate in every lineage that carries it until an intervention is developed that prevents it from doing so, or until the lineages that carry it end. The first is being worked toward. The second is also happening. Both processes continue simultaneously, and the mutation does not observe either one. What has been described thus far represents only the outermost fragment of the truth, the portion that human language can approximate. What lies beneath that layer, what the deepest accounts suggest, is something for which no preparation is adequate. Nothing that follows can be unheard. You were warned. January. Is it January? The month has blurred at its edges. Sophia tells me dates and I believe her. I believe her because she has given me no reason not to believe her, and because my own sense of sequential time is, because time is. I have been keeping the notebook. I want you to know that. Even now, even here in this particular stage of the dissolution, I am keeping the notebook. The handwriting is worse. I know the handwriting is worse because I can see it becoming worse and I can't. The connection between the intention and the execution is, there are delays, not long delays, moments. But moments are new. Moments did not used to exist between what I meant to do and what I did. Alina visited on what Sophia says was a Tuesday. I'm nodding this because I want it noted. Alina visited and she sat beside me on the couch and she showed me her drawings. She is working on a series of drawings of imaginary animals, hybrids, creatures she invents with the specific seriousness of a child who has decided this is real work. And I looked at each one carefully and said what I thought was true about each one. I think I said true things. I think the words arrived in the right order. I think. She held my hand when she left. She pressed it between both of hers, the way she did when she was very small, and she said, "Papa, you should sleep with the absolute authority of a child who has not yet learned that authority does not always produce outcomes." And I said, "Yes, I know. I am trying, and this was the truest thing I have said in weeks. I am trying. I am trying." The effort of trying is constant and total and produces nothing. I read the notebook after she left. My own entries, and here is the thing that I need you to understand, the thing I am nodding clinically, the thing I have crossed into now without realizing the crossing. Some of the entries are not ones I remember writing. Not all of them. Some of them I remember. But there are pages, there are specific pages, in a handwriting that is mine but slightly off, slightly tilted from its familiar angle, that describe events and observations that I cannot connect to memories. I wrote things I don't remember writing. I am the unreliable narrator of my own life. I have become the thing I cannot trust, and the dissolution of that trust, the specific horror of reaching for yourself and finding something only approximately there. This is what I was circling when I asked. Not what had I seen, but what precisely had seen me. The line crossed without knowing it was a line. Sophia has told me, and I am recording this because it is important, because the recording is one of the last things I am doing that feels like me, that I have twice spoken to her in a language she does not speak. Not Italian, something else. She tried to transcribe it phonetically, and showed me the transcription, and I cannot read it and I cannot recognize it. And when I attempt to locate the memory of the moment she describes, I find only a white place where the memory should be. There are two of her sometimes, two Sophias, occupying slightly different positions in the same space. And I know that this is the visual cortex responding to the disruption in thalamic relay, that the processing of visual information requires the thalamus to reconcile multiple streams. And when the thalamus is damaged, the reconciliation fails, and what results is overlap, doubling. And I know all of this, and still, when I look at her and see her twice, I reach for her hand with something that is not clinically describable. I am describing it here, the need, the specific animal need to confirm that there is still something real within reach. This need does not diminish with illness. I want you to know that specifically. It intensifies. Everything that made me human before the illness makes me more human in the illness, more vulnerable to loss, more aware of what is present, more, I lose the word. Grateful, the word is grateful. I am grateful for every moment I can still see her face clearly, even when there are two of her, even then. But there is something else, something I have not written in the notebook, because writing it felt like a step I couldn't take back, a door I was not ready to go through. And I am going to write it now because not writing it no longer seems like protection, and also because I am becoming less and less certain that what I choose to write or not write has the weight I once believed it did. I believe that I have become part of what I was investigating, that the mutation, the codon 178 asparagine substitution, the inherited sentence, has stopped being something that is happening to me and has started being something that I am, that the line between the disease and the person carrying it has dissolved. I cannot locate the boundary. There is no boundary. There is only what remains and what is dissolving, and neither of those things is separable from the other. He has stopped fighting what he has become. Let me say the thing. I should have gotten the genetic test earlier. I should have gotten it at 30, at 25. I should have read the genealogy when Nana Rosaria died, when the boxes came to us. Instead of tapping them shut and putting them in the storage unit and not thinking about them for 7 years, I had reasons not to think about them. I had a life, a real and good life, and the boxes were heavy and the storage unit was 20 minutes away. These are not excuses. They are explanations. I offer them with the specificity of a man who understands the difference. I should have told Sophia earlier, when I first read the website at 4 in the morning, when I first thought about his mother's eyes and put the thought away. I should not have put it away. I put it away because I was protecting her, or protecting the life we had, or protecting the ordinary Tuesday we were living in, and this protection cost us time, and time is what we did not have. I want to say this clearly. I was wrong to protect her that way. She deserved the truth sooner. I was wrong. And Alina, who is 9 years old and who draws imaginary animals with systematic seriousness, and who presses her hands around mine when she leaves because she has learned, in the way children learn things without being told, that this is something she can do, this specific gesture, this warmth. Alina, who has a 50% probability of carrying what I carry. I cannot tell her this. She is not. Sophia and the genetic counselor and I have talked about when and how, and the conclusion is, not now, not yet, when she is older, when she can understand what understanding it means. And I agree with this conclusion. I agree with it completely, and I lie here in the thing that is not sleep, and I think about that probability and the specific shape of her hands, and I agree with the conclusion. I have been a reasonable man. I have tried to be a good man. These two things do not inoculate a person against what is written in their own biology. This is the sentence I have been avoiding. I am dying of something that was inside me before I was born, and my daughter may be dying of the same thing, and I will not be here to sit beside her if she is. I have said it, I cannot unsay it. The page holds it now. Enough of the theoretical, enough of the academic distance. What was found in that room deserves to be described as it was, in full, in light, with nothing hidden. This is what stage 3 looks like, not as metaphor, not as implication, as the direct, physical, unfiltered reality of a human body denied the one process it requires to maintain coherence. The weight loss is not gradual. It is aggressive, visible, alarming in the clinical sense, alarming in that it produces alarm in the people observing it, which is the body's correct function when the body is doing something this wrong this fast. In a period of 6 weeks, Marco lost 14 kilograms. Not fat, muscle, connective tissue. The fat stores deplete first. Then the body begins to metabolize itself in a kind of desperate biological cannibalism, disassembling its own structural material in the absence of the repair processes that sleep provides. The face changes first, the hollowing around the eyes, the sharpening of the jaw, the particular way that a face looks when it has been worked on from the inside. Then the hands, which Sophia held because she could feel in them what was happening to the rest of him. His body temperature was wrong. Not constantly elevated, wrong, variable, unpredictable, swinging between high and low, without reference to the environment or any evident trigger. He would be cold in a warm room and sweating in a cool one, and the sweating was continuous and odorless, a pure autonomic malfunction, the body's temperature regulation system receiving signals that had been distorted in transit through the damaged thalamic relay. The hallucinations were, and this is important, this specificity is important, not frightening in the generic sense. Marco described them in the notebook and to the medical team with the same precision he brought to everything. The figures were consistent, approximately human, slightly wrong in dimension, preferring doorways and corners, visible at the periphery and absent at direct gaze. They did not threaten, they observed. He had begun to find their presence less alarming than initially and more. And this is the word he used, written in the notebook in the tilted handwriting of a man for whom writing had become effortful, more familiar. They had been with him long enough to feel like residents of the space. There was also the sound, low, rhythmic, not identifiable as any environmental source despite systematic investigation. He had stopped checking. The sound was there. The sound was present in the room the way the figures were present in the room, without explanation and without apparent intention, and he had incorporated them into the environment of his dissolution, the way the mind incorporates what it cannot change. His eyes did not close entirely in sleep because sleep did not come. Sophia wet cloth and placed it over his eyes during the hours he lay still. It was something to do. It was the thing she could do. What was hidden is now visible. There is no door left closed. The disease has a beauty to it. This is the thing I am telling you, and I understand the recoil this statement produces. And I am telling you anyway because the truth of it is inseparable from the horror of it. And to describe only the horror is to describe it incompletely. It is beautiful the way a mechanism is beautiful, with the cold, absolute, inhuman beauty of something that does exactly what it was designed to do with complete efficiency. The prion propagates with an elegance that the research literature, in its most candid moments, acknowledges. The structural transformation of a correctly folded protein into a misfolded one. The way the pathological configuration is communicated through physical contact, protein to protein, like a story passed in whispers across a room, is, in geometric terms, an object of fascination. And the thalamus itself, this walnut-sized structure at the center of the brain that Marco pressed his hands against the wall trying to feel, it is the relay point, the switchboard, the place where everything converges before anything is allowed through to consciousness. Every sensation, every sight, every sound, every attempt at sleep passes through it. And the prion in the codon 178 carrier finds it, every time. Across 47 families, across 5 continents, across 250 years of documented cases, the prion finds the thalamus with an accuracy that exceeds random distribution by every statistical measure available. This accuracy is not intelligence. The prion does not know where it is going. The prion is a misfolded protein. It has no more intention than a falling stone, and yet the stone falls precisely, always the same direction, always the same target. What this means, if you allow yourself to sit with it, there is something at work here that functions as though it has chosen. It has not chosen. It cannot choose. But the outcome of its choosingless propagation is indistinguishable from a choice to destroy the precise capacity that makes human existence bearable. The capacity to fall into darkness and be repaired and restored, and to wake, each morning, as a slightly reconstituted version of the self that went under. Remove that capacity. The self is not reconstituted. The self consumes itself instead, night after night, until the consumption is complete. Understanding this, fully understanding the mechanism, the target, the precision, is not comforting. Understanding this is worse than not understanding it, which is itself a form of the disease. The knowing is the wound. Understanding the mechanism is worse than fearing the monster. Marco understood the mechanism. February. The notebook ends in February. The last dated entry is February 9th. The handwriting is barely legible, not because his hands failed, but because the connection between intention and movement had degraded past the point of reliable execution. The letters are large and irregular, like a child's writing, like someone learning the alphabet again from the beginning. There are words crossed out, words that could not be completed. Words that begin and then trail into something that is not a word. A cluster of letters that his hand produced in the attempt to produce the word he intended. The last complete, legible sentence in the notebook is this: Alina will be okay. Not, I believe Alina will be okay. Not, I hope. Simply the statement, the declaration, the assertion that may or may not be true, and that he wrote with everything he had left because writing it was the only thing he could still do toward making it so. Below that, in the trailing handwriting, S, and then something illegible, an attempt at Sophia's name, an unfinished communication, a letter that stopped at the first character and then became only the effort of the hand on the page, the human need to leave a mark that says, I was here. I meant to say something. The something was love. Take the love even though the words didn't come. He was moved to the neurological unit at the University of Padua on February 14th. Not because there was a treatment available. There was no treatment. He was moved because the care he required, the continuous monitoring, the nutritional support, the management of his body's failing autonomic functions exceeded what was possible at home. Sophia and Alina moved into the nearby apartment of a friend for the weeks that followed. Dr. Fossati's notes from that period describe the following. Marco was awake in the physiological sense but not consistently responsive to external stimuli. His eyes remained open. His body maintained the basic functions. His face maintained, according to the nurses who documented his status every 4 hours, the particular expression that appeared in every documented account across every FFI patient in the medical literature: attentive, listening, oriented towards something the observers could not identify. The monitors showed the brain activity of a man who was not sleeping, had not slept, would not sleep, who was present in a room with people who loved him, and who was simultaneously, irrevocably, located somewhere else. This is the part that was edited out, cut from every version you have ever encountered, because someone decided you could not handle the truth of what was found in that place. They were trying to be kind. I am not going to be kind. You asked for the truth. Here it is. What you just heard was only the beginning. What remains after? This is what we are discussing now. Not the disease's progression, which has been described, which is documented, which has a literature, but the physical and psychological aftermath that occupies the spaces between the clinical notes. Sophia has described, in interviews conducted by researchers studying the familial impact of FFI, the specific texture of those February weeks. The walk to the hospital, which she made twice a day, the cold morning air, the sound of her own footsteps, the particular quality of a city that continues its ordinary functioning while something extraordinary is happening in one room of one building in one neighborhood. She said, the hardest thing was the contrast. Everything outside was just a normal city. And then I would go into the room and Marco would be there, with his eyes open. And I would hold his hand and talk to him because the nurses said he might still hear. And I talked to him about ordinary things. The weather, what Alina had done that morning. A film I'd seen years ago that I suddenly remembered, because I didn't know what else to give him except the ordinary world. And the ordinary world was the thing he couldn't access anymore. The nurses who worked the night shifts in that unit reported, in the internal hospital debrief conducted after, that Marco's room was different from others in a way they found difficult to articulate, but that each of them independently mentioned. The attending physician who reviewed these reports noted, every nurse who worked the night shift during that period mentioned, unprompted, that they found themselves checking his room more frequently than required. When asked why, the answers were similar. They felt subjectively that something was happening in the room, not threatening, not alarming, something they wanted to be present for. No one could say what they were waiting for. No one could say what they thought they would see. Marco died on March 3, 2020 at 4:47 in the morning. He was 41 years old. He had been symptomatic for 5 months. His eyes, which had remained open through the final weeks, closed in the minutes before his death. The nurse who was present noted this in the record. She also noted, because the record in this unit was thorough in ways that reflected the specific nature of the cases it handled, that his expression in those final minutes was the one described in the literature. Attentive, listening. And then at the end, something she recorded as resolved, though she added a note beside this that said, I don't know if that is the right word. I don't have a better one. The first moment of the world after the worst. It looks exactly like the world before. This is the wrong detail. March 3 RD 2020, 4:47 a.m., Padua, Italy. Death certificate, Marco Vianello, 41. Cause, fatal familial insomnia confirmed by genetic testing, PRNP gene, codon 178 mutation, D178N. Duration of symptomatic illness, 20 weeks. Documentation filed with the University of Padua Prion Disease Registry and the European Creutzfeldt-Jakob Disease Surveillance Network. Case number, EU FFI 2020114. His brain was donated, as he requested in a document signed in November of the previous year. It went to Dr. Fossati's team and subsequently to the Prion Disease Research Institute in Munich. The neuropathological examination confirmed the following: extensive spongiform degeneration of the thalamus, with secondary involvement of the inferior olive and the cerebellum. The cortex, which carries most of what we think of as personality and memory and intelligence, was comparatively intact. The damage was concentrated, precise, confined to the structures that the mutation had always targeted, and no others. Dr. Andrea Fossati, neurologist, University of Padua, 2021. What I want people to understand about Marco specifically, and about FFI patients generally, is that the cognitive awareness persists far longer than people expect it to. He was writing in his notebook well into stage 2. He was making decisions about his care, about Alina's future, about his brain donation, that reflected the same values and judgment he had before onset. The disease took his sleep. It did not, until very near the end, take him. He was present for almost all of it. I don't know whether that makes it better or worse. I think it makes it more true. Dr. Fossati asked me not to print Marco's full name. I am telling you this so you understand that Marco Vianello is a composite, built from multiple documented cases in the European FFI registry, assembled to protect the privacy of the specific families whose experiences informed it. Everything that happened in this account has happened. The name is the only thing that was changed. The disease never changes anything. A fact no authority has explained. Why, in 9 generations of documentation, there has never been one exception. Other cases, other dates, other families. 1992, Chicago, Illinois. A 44-year-old man, American-born, third-generation Italian immigrant. identified in the literature as patient A. No family history disclosed. The family had separated from the Venetian branch 2 generations prior and lost contact with the relevant information. He was diagnosed initially with severe sleep disorder, then with rapid onset dementia, then with Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease before the FFI subtype was confirmed. He died 17 weeks after onset. His brain confirmed the diagnosis. His genetic testing was performed posthumously. His 2 adult children were informed. One agreed to testing, one did not. 2004. Sao Paulo, Brazil, 2 siblings, Maria and João, a family name withheld at request of the surviving family. Maria, 39, onset in June. João, 44, onset in September of the same year. 2 FFI cases in the same immediate family simultaneously. Maria died in January 2005. João died in March 2005. Their mother, 71, was spared. She carried 1 copy of the mutation, but her codon 129 status meant onset, if it came, would come later. It came 2 years later in 2007. She died in 2008. 2014. Perth, Australia, a woman, 36 years old, previously unaware of her family's history. The Australian branch of the lineage had received no documentation from the Italian branch, and the disease, when it came, arrived without warning. She had 2 children, ages 6 and 9. She was diagnosed accurately and rapidly because by 2014 the genetic test was more widely available, and the neurologist she saw recognized the symptom pattern. She lived 23 weeks after onset. Her children have been offered genetic testing. As of the most recent available report, neither child has chosen to test. The younger is now 18. 2022. Milan, Italy, the most recent confirmed European case in the public literature. A woman, 48, onset confirmed by genetic testing, currently in stage 2 at time of publication. Research team at Padua is following her case with particular attention because she has enrolled in an experimental antisense oligonucleotide trial, the first FFI patient to receive this intervention during active symptomatic illness. The trial is ongoing. No results have been published. The most recent case, the date closest to today, the trial is still running. The last person who saw the inside of this disease and came back, meaning the last person who survived to report on it in full, is a woman I will call M. Her account was recorded in 2019 as part of a longitudinal study at the University of Bologna. She was the primary caregiver for her husband during his illness, which she described as the most complete experience of my life, in the way that the word complete means that nothing else could fit inside it. She reported the following, in order of what she found most important: that he never lost his humor entirely, that in the middle of stage 2, when the hallucinations were frequent and the confusion severe, he would sometimes make jokes, small, dry jokes in the tone he'd always used, and that this felt to her like him finding her through the noise, signaling his location, saying, "I am still here. I know what is funny. I know you." That the hardest night was not the night he died, but a night in stage 3 when he held her hand and said her name clearly and correctly, in a voice that sounded entirely like his pre-illness voice, not the thickened, halting speech of late-stage disease, and then said, with equal clarity, "I don't know where I am," and then said, "I know you're here. That's the same thing." That in the final days he would occasionally briefly sleep, minutes, maybe 10 minutes. The monitors would show the distinctive signature of actual sleep, the electrical pattern distinct from the damaged wakefulness, and she would sit beside him in those minutes and not move, not breathe too loudly as though any disturbance might end it. The sleep would last 10 minutes or 8 or 12, and then the pattern would change and his eyes would open and he would be back in the other place. Her last recorded words on the subject at the end of the 2019 session, before she asked the recorder to be stopped: "I want people to know that he was not lost the whole time. He was there. He kept coming back. Every time I thought he was gone, he came back for a moment. I want that on the record." Her last recorded words on the subject. Current status: There is no cure for fatal familial insomnia. This is not a failure of effort or investment. It is a function of the specific nature of the disease mechanism. Prion diseases resist treatment because the agent of disease is not external and not alive. The immune system has no protocol for misfolded proteins that are structurally similar to normal brain proteins. Antibodies cannot be developed because the target does not present as foreign. The blood-brain barrier complicates delivery of any potential therapeutic agent, and by the time symptoms are present, the damage to the thalamus is already extensive. The research continues. Antisense oligonucleotide therapy is the current most promising avenue. Synthetic molecules designed to bind to the PRNP gene's messenger RNA, preventing production of the prion protein altogether. In theory, no protein means no misfolding means no propagation. In animal models, this approach has shown significant promise. The human trial, currently underway, will report its first interim findings within 2 years. There is also doxycycline, an antibiotic that has shown some ability to interfere with prion propagation in laboratory settings. A prophylactic trial was conducted in Italy and Germany for individuals from known FFI families who had tested positive but were pre-symptomatic. Results were inconclusive but not discouraging. Dr. Pietro Corti's Prion Disease Research Institute, Munich, 2023. I have worked in this field for 20 years. I have watched people die of this disease who should have had 50 more years of living. I'm not able to tell you that a cure is imminent. I'm able to tell you that the tools we have now are different from the tools we had 10 years ago, and the tools we will have in 10 years will be different again. Science moves. The disease has not changed in 250 years. Science has changed enormously. That gap is closing. The files that remain sealed are the following: the full genealogical records of the Venetian family, restricted at the family's request to protect the privacy of living members; the complete rosters of affected family members in all identified lineages, held by the European CJD Surveillance Network and the National Prion Disease Pathology Surveillance Center at Case Western Reserve University, not publicly accessible; and the document that should not exist but does, a letter written by a member of the Venetian family in the 1920s, found in the parish archive during a 2003 digitization project, addressed to no one, signed only with a first name, that describes the disease with clinical accuracy decades before the clinical literature existed. The letter ends with a request. The request is simple. It says, "Find a way to stop this, please. There are children coming who don't know yet what they are carrying. Please find a way before they have to find out the way we found out." The letter is dated 1924. The children it was written for were born. Some of them are still alive. Some of them are carrying what the letter warned about. The search for a way to stop it continues. The letter has been waiting for an answer for 100 years. Alina is 10 now. She goes to school on the bus, which she prefers to walking because on the bus she can sit with her friend Giulia, and they talk about things Alina doesn't tell her parents about, which is correct and normal and exactly how it should be. She is doing better in arithmetic. She has moved on from imaginary animals to imaginary cities, elaborate, self-consistent cities with their own rules and geography and problems. She draws them in a new notebook, a red one. She sleeps deeply and well. Sophia watches this. Sophia watches it the way you watch something precious that exists inside a question, the way you watch it without wanting to seem like you're watching. She checks on Alina at night sometimes. Alina sleeps with her mouth slightly open and her hair covering the pillow in the specific disorganized way that is completely, specifically hers. And the stuffed rabbit is back on the shelf facing the right direction. And the room is the room of a child who is safe inside a life that is mostly good. Sophia has not told Alina about the genetic test yet. Alina is 10. They will tell her when she is older. This is the right decision. Everyone who has been consulted has agreed it is the right decision. Some nights Sophia sits in the kitchen after Alina is in bed and the apartment is quiet and she drinks tea and does not think about statistics. She does not think about coin flips. She does not think about the biscuit tin in the storage unit, which she has moved to a shelf in the hall closet because she couldn't bring herself to throw it away and couldn't bring herself to leave it somewhere she couldn't see it. She does not think about the stripe of amber light that comes through Alina's bedroom curtain at the same angle it came through hers and Marco's, in this same building, on the same canal. She thinks about ordinary things, the grocery shopping, her mother's knee, the ceramics plant which sent flowers and a card signed by the whole office. She thinks about a film she might watch. She thinks about whether it will rain tomorrow. The rabbit faces the right direction. She checked. She checked before she came and sat down, and it faces the right direction. A child sleeps in the next room, carrying something she doesn't know she may be carrying, and her mother sits in the kitchen and doesn't think about it, and the not thinking is the only thing left to do. The mutation has existed for 250 documented years. It will continue for an indeterminate period beyond this point. The individuals it has destroyed, Giacomo Vianello and Pietro Vianello and Silvano, and the unnamed woman in Perth, and the man in Chicago and Maria and Joe, and the woman whose husband found her through the noise of stage 2 to say her name, clearly, one more time. These individuals were each of them a complete and unrepeatable configuration of experience and personality and love and history, and their suffering was real, and their loss was absolute. And the mutation that destroyed them noted none of this. The mutation does not note anything. It propagates. It converts healthy proteins to misfolded ones. It targets the thalamus with the precision of a mechanism that has always known its destination. And when the individual whose thalamus it has destroyed has ceased to exist, when the body has completed its final failure, and the monitors have recorded the last electrical activity, and the notes have been written, and the brain has gone to the laboratory, and the family has begun the specific, interminable process of continuing without someone who was at the center of everything. The mutation has already, in the bodies of children who do not yet know, found its next address. The research continues. The trials continue. The scientists of extraordinary dedication continue, in laboratories in Padua and Munich and Cleveland and Zurich, to develop the tools that were not yet available when the letter was written in 1924, the tools that may eventually, not certainly, not inevitably, but possibly, be adequate to interrupt a mechanism that has been running, unchanged, for longer than any of them have been alive. They continue because that is what is available to do. Continuing is what is available. The mutation does not continue because it decided to. It continues because nothing has yet stopped it. There is a significant difference between those two things, and that difference is the entire argument for the research, and it is sufficient. It must be sufficient. Human beings are a brief event in the history of a universe that began before consciousness existed and will end, if it ends, after consciousness has long since been extinguished. The mutation is a brief event in the history of human beings. The individuals destroyed by the mutation are brief events within that brief event. The suffering is real. The scale is vast. The suffering is real anyway. This is not a contradiction that can be resolved. It is a fact that must be held. The amber stripe of light on the ceiling is real. The child sleeping in the next room is real. The hand pressed around another hand in a February hospital room was real. These things do not require the universe's acknowledgement to be real. They are real in themselves by themselves, and their reality is sufficient. The mutation does not know this. It propagates anyway. And what remains of the I that began this account? I have been with this knowledge for long enough now to know what knowing costs. I began as a chronicler, objective, clinical, armed with dates and codon numbers and the vocabulary of biochemistry and the literature of 250 years of documentation. I began at the appropriate distance, the academic distance, the distance maintained by researchers and physicians who understand that proximity is a choice, and that too much proximity produces an account that cannot be trusted. The distance did not hold. It never holds. This is the thing that Poe understood, that the unreliable narrator is not a literary device but a documentary truth. The act of looking changes the one who looks. I looked at Marco and his notebook and his mother's eyes and his daughter's sleeping face and the letter from 1924 and the nurse who chose the word resolved without being sure it was right. And I was changed by the looking. And the account that emerged from the changed looker is therefore not the clinical document I intended. It is something truer than that. The question I cannot stop asking, the question that surfaces at 4 in the morning, in the specific dark that has different qualities depending on how long you have been awake inside it, is not, why does this mutation exist? That question has an answer. It exists because random variation produces infinite forms and some forms survive, and the mechanism of inheritance is indifferent to whether what is inherited is good or terrible. The question I cannot stop asking is this. In those final minutes, when the monitors showed the signature of actual sleep arriving at last, when Marco's eyes briefly closed in the way they hadn't closed in months, what was he given? What does a man find in those 10 minutes after being kept from sleep for so long? I want there to be something there. I want the locked door to have opened. I want the gate, that walnut-sized gate at the center of everything, to have admitted him finally to the place where the body is repaired and the self is reconstituted, and the continuity that the disease interrupted is restored, even briefly, even for 10 minutes. I have no evidence for this. The evidence does not support hope, it supports facts. But Sophia sat beside him and did not breathe too loudly and waited for those 10 minutes to end. And they ended, and his eyes opened, and he was in the other place again, and she was still there when the monitors recorded the last signal and the room was quiet. She was still there. That is also on the record. That is also a fact. Somewhere tonight, in a body that does not yet know what it is carrying, a walnut-sized gate is still open, and it is still open only because it has not yet been found.